There's five main frequencies, and it's getting to the frequency between the alpha and theta border right around 8 hertz, which is when psychic and mediumistic activity occur. Okay, so yes, everybody can develop these abilities to varying extents, and everybody is capable, Dani, of having a psychic and mediumistic experience.
Today we have the privilege to have here with us Mark Anthony, also known as the psychic lawyer, which is not how you would normally combine these two words together. So Mark is a fourth-generation psychic medium, Oxford-educated attorney. He's been designated Visionary of the Year by Best Holistic Life and awarded the OMMIE Award for Best Psychic Medium. He's author of award-winning bestsellers The Afterlife Frequency, Evidence of Eternity, and Never Letting Go. And he's also been speaking for quite some time now, conventions, TV, radio, as a psychic medium, legal analyst, and the researcher and expert in the paranormal and ancient mysteries. So thank you so much, Mark, for giving us a chance to speak to you today.
Thank you, Dani. It's an honor to be here, and I've been looking forward to meeting you and to doing this interview for all your listeners.
Brilliant. So what I love about your approach is you're trying to offer a rather scientific approach or perspective to topics that are usually not perceived that way. So, obviously one of your fields of expertise is psychic mediumship. So why don't we start perhaps with you telling the audience some of the ways that we have these days to prove scientifically that this is a real thing, which I think you described very nicely with your electromagnetic soul theory.
Yeah, we'll start with the EMS theory, the electromagnetic soul theory. After a lifetime of being a psychic medium, Dani, and through my work when I was an attorney, I'm an attorney, but when I was practicing law full time, part of my practice focused on injury cases, particularly brain injury. And so I had to work with neuroscientists and neurologists on studying the human brain. And then through my work with quantum physics and also being a man of faith. And in fact, at one point in my life, when I was a teenager, I actually contemplated entering the clergy. Okay. And we see that every faith teaches us that the soul, the spirit, the who and what we are, pre-exists the body, comes into the body, moves on after the body dies. I mean, whether it's Hinduism, Buddhism, Christianity, Judaism, Islam, Native American spirituality, animistic religions, they all teach the same thing. And then we know from the first law of thermodynamics and physics that energy is neither created nor destroyed, only transferred from one form to another. So when I started working with my mediumship full time after I left the practice of law to focus on this, I started seeing a correlation. And we go to science. Everything we know is made of molecules. Now, what's really fascinating about science, you have biological sciences on one hand, the physical sciences on the other. So you have the study of organic matter versus inorganic matter. And for centuries, there's been a line between the two of them. Okay, they don't really have any correlation.
Yeah.
Right. But they do, because everything we now know is made of molecules, which in turn are composed of atoms, which in turn are made of electrons, protons, and neutrons, which are made on the smallest, most basic level of a particle of electromagnetic energy known as a quantum. Now, of course, we got the Higgs boson particle and hadrons, but the smallest particle is a quantum. And for our friends who are physicists, yes, an electron is technically a quantum because it's 1/1800th the size of a proton. Long story short, on the subatomic level, there's no distinction between the biological and the physical sciences, because everything, and that means you and me, Dani. I mean, I'm here in the United States in Florida being interviewed by you. You're in Venice, Italy, okay? So this interview is being conducted through electromagnetic energy in a network of satellites. So what this means is that you and me, our bodies, the microphones we're speaking into, the radio waves that this program is being transmitted on, the moon, the rings of Saturn, and beyond are all at the subatomic level composed of the same form of electromagnetic energy, which is a quantum. Now, later on, when we talk about NDEs, we'll get into the interconnectedness of the universe, and that is how all this is related. So that's how I developed the theory, the electromagnetic soul, the EMS, to define in 21st century terms what we really are, which is pure consciousness, a soul, a spirit, which is eternal electromagnetic energy.
I think you said in one of the interviews, I can't remember which one now, that anyone is technically able to develop psychic powers. And you're the fourth person that tells me this, but I should mention that all the people that have told me this have actually had a near-death experience. And if I understood correctly, you are a child experiencer yourself?
Oh, absolutely. Both my parents had these abilities. It runs for generations on both sides of the family. I've tracked it back into the 1890s on both sides of the family. And so logically, one can assume it goes even further than that. But it's, the stories were hard to get hold of. And both sides of my family could not have been more different. My father's family, they were very staunch, conservative Baptists from Pennsylvania, white Anglo-Saxon Protestant. But my father had 4 siblings, and he had 3 sisters and a brother. He and one of his sisters, Marjorie, both had these abilities, as did their mother, their mother, Isabel, and their maternal grandmother, Grace. But they kept it very quiet. Okay, it was like something that was not discussed openly. My mother's side of the family had come to the United States from Italy, and the Italian side of the family looked at this as a gift from God. And my maternal great-grandmother, Giovanna, was known in Little Italy of New York City and North New Jersey as the woman who knows things. In fact, in 2016, Public Broadcasting, PBS, did a special on Italian-American immigrants. It was a 8-hour special. I think it was like 4 hours a night. They actually did an entire segment on Giovanna about her, and they referenced her psychic abilities. So when my dad got out of the Navy, he was a Navy SEAL, and he was at a dance. He met my mother, and they said they connected, and it wasn't just like an attraction in the physical sense. It was much deeper. And my mother said, after a couple dates, I can see spirits. And my father said, oh my God, I do too. So what we have seen, Dani, is this appears to be a genetic proclivity. And so when 2 parents have the same, what's known as recessive genetic traits, meaning it skips a generation or 2, the likelihood one of their children having that genetic trait intensifies. But to get to your question, human beings, we all have the same basic physiology. And there's 2 main psychic receptor areas in the body: the solar plexus, which is at the bottom of the rib cage. That's why when people say, I'm getting a feeling in my gut, I feel it in the pit of my stomach. You hear this from military and police. I got to trust my gut. Where do you think that expression came from? The solar plexus is the second most complex bundle of nerves outside of the cerebral cortex in the body. There are scientists who are now referring to this as the second brain. Other species have multiple brains. An octopus has 9 brains, 1 in the head and 1 for each of its arms. So it's not unusual that we may have a second brain. Now, does it do math calculations? No, but it has other functions. Then behind the center of the forehead, and it's what people who practice yoga and people who are adherents to both Hinduism and Buddhism and Jainism, this is what's known as the third eye chakra. The chakra are 7 energy points within the body, and the pineal gland is the smallest, most mysterious, most misunderstood, and one of the most studied organs in the body. It has both calcite and magnetite crystals, which have piezoelectric properties, meaning when pressure is exerted, it generates an electromagnetic field. It regulates our ability to perceive light. Very interesting. Not just visible light, perhaps the spiritual light. When people who have a near-death experience talk about going into the light, it secretes the hormone melatonin. Long story short, it also regulates our brainwave frequencies, and it's getting there's 5 main frequencies, and it's getting to the frequency between the alpha and theta border right around 8 hertz, which is when psychic and mediumistic activity occur. Okay, pardon the lengthy explanation. The reason I'm bringing this up is everybody has this physiology. Some people are better at it than others. It's like some people are much better athletes than others. Some are better mathematicians, some better artists, musicians, so on and so forth. So like we can all swim, but are we all going to be Olympic swimmers? And, you know, we can all play the piano or bang around on it, but are we all going to be an Elton John or a Rachmaninoff? You know, it's a, most likely not. So yes, everybody can develop these abilities to varying extents, and everybody is capable, Dani, of having a psychic and mediumistic experience. So to answer your question directly, yes.
So you don't feel, I mean, as an NDE researcher yourself, you must be familiar with the fact that 80+% of people who come back from a near-death experience tend to develop some latent ability. Could be telepathy, obviously mediumship being one of them. So I was wondering if you were able to connect with spirits prior to your NDE as perhaps part of your genetic imprint, or maybe that could be the reason as to why you were able to develop the skills.
I was about 3.5 years old when I started interacting with my invisible friends. And I remember my mother going, "Oh, he's got it." My dad was like, "Oh, God, he's got it." Because my father was afraid. It's a long story, and if people want to find out about it, it's in my book, Evidence of Eternity. But his sister Marjorie was treated brutally because of her mediumistic abilities. It was horrible what had happened to her, and he just didn't want things like that happening to me. And they said, "Don't tell anyone about this." He said, "You can talk to Mommy and I all you want about this, but don't tell people outside of the family." And then as I got older, I began to see this. It was about 6 months later, Dani, when I had my near-death experience.
Okay.
So from a very young age, spirits and psychic phenomenon has just simply been part of my life. You brought up an interesting point that one of the side effects, or rather after effects, of a near-death experience is enhanced psychic ability, whether it's telepathy, precognitive ability, perceiving spirits. And the question then is, why? Does it do something? Does the near-death experience do something to the brain which activates the pineal gland on another level, or does the near-death experience remove the fears and the emotional blocks to the ability? Because another one of the after effects of a near-death experience is people no longer being afraid of death. And another one is the sense of timelessness, that time really has no meaning, and that we're all interconnected by electromagnetic soul theory, according to Einstein's general theory of relativity, which every major quantum physicist since that time has underscored, is that on that quantum level, time doesn't exist. And so when your EMS goes into the afterlife frequency and then returns, we know that we're all energetically interconnected, and that time exists for us because we're born, we grow old, and we die. But once you get beyond the physical, it appears time is not the same thing that we think it is.
I actually raised a very interesting point. You must be familiar with the work of Albert Heime. which I think carried out the first, I guess we could say, methodic research on NDEs when there was no such term yet. But not many people know that he was actually the geology, if I, don't quote me on that, but the university professor of Albert Einstein. And he had already been published his work on NDEs, and apparently Albert Einstein was very fond of his research. So it could be, you know, obviously that's a theory, of course, but that he's been, let's say, inspired, or his famous theory of relativity would have been inspired by those accounts where Albert Einstein was saying that those people falling from heights, you know, had their time dilated, you know, or you know, stopping entirely. So that's an interesting one. Obviously, we think of Albert Einstein as a, you know, a physicist, but he was, you know, also a mystic, as far as I'm concerned.
Very much so. I mean, Albert Einstein, he was so many different things. You know, we know him for the theory of relativity, but he was devoutly Jewish, but really his beliefs were much broader than any one particular religion. And what's really fascinating, Dani, is that a number of his colleagues, I believe it was Max Planck and Werner Heisenberg, talked about Hinduism. And they said that they wish they had discovered Hinduism earlier in their lives because the Hindu beliefs in timelessness and in reincarnation and in energy seem to mirror their findings with quantum physics. And I always found that very, very fascinating. You know, if you take I don't want to call it mythology, let's take the stories out of it and go to the core beliefs. Because the Hindus believe, you know, we're always worried at the end of the world, end of the world. And the Hindus will be like, yeah, there's the end of the world, but don't worry about it because another world will reform. Because energy is an eternal cycle. And I think it's really fascinating that people of that intellectual caliber, which include Albert Einstein, accepted the concepts in faith, which now we're seeing faith and science may not really be mutually exclusive, but rather they're describing the same phenomena through different lenses and different terminology.
No, absolutely. I think if you dig deep enough, it feels to me that pretty much all main religions were talking about the same things. And what I find really fascinating is that these days we get to, let's say, witness an era that perhaps finally science, you know, maybe with the field of near-death studies and many other phenomena, is able to finally catch up on, you know, what religion has been trying to transmit to us through faith. So, you know, I don't know if you feel the same, but I think it's an exciting time to be alive.
It is. Most definitely, yes.
So in which case, one of the questions I like to ask my guests is, do you feel that perhaps that we are entering a new era that perhaps is defined by a shift from a material to a more spiritual society?
Well, I'd like to, although current events certainly would indicate otherwise. The problem is there are too many people, and this is not political, this is too many people are in positions of power where they're not embracing the spiritual, but rather the ego. And the brain, which I believe did not create consciousness. Neuroscience, the study of the human brain, the traditional school of thought is that consciousness is created by chemical reactions and electrical impulses within the brain, although neuroscience can't explain how. My friend and colleague, Dr. Eben Alexander, I'm sure you've probably interviewed him, and Dr. Mary Neal, she's also a friend and colleague. We were all discussing this, and if you look at a book on neuroscience, it's maybe 600 or 700 pages long and only has perhaps a paragraph on consciousness. It's because they try to avoid it. And the current people of faith have always believed that the consciousness, the soul, pre-exists the body, comes into the body, moves on after the body. The brain may be thought of as a computer hard drive. Professor Hans-Peter Dürr from the Max Planck Institute of Physics in Germany has analogized the human brain to a computer hard drive. so that when the hard drive crashes, this consciousness does not die. It is merely transferred beyond that. And I think when we start looking at that, that's number one, very comforting. But the ego is what's manufactured by the brain. It's all about me, 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 and it's a very primeval thing. I like to look at ego as an acronym for edging God out. Edging God out. And so the problem with the world is the type of personalities that want to be world leaders are very ego-driven personalities. And they tend to have this desire to dominate, control, because that's part of it. So there's this dichotomy between the spirit and the ego. Now, that being said, with the blossoming interest in spirituality, and for the past 50 years, we've had IANDS, the International Association for Near-Death Studies, certainly the groundbreaking work of Dr. Raymond Moody, who developed the term near-death experience. So in the past half century, we've now had the scientific method of objective observation applied to this near-death experience phenomena, which has been documented for thousands of years. So there is a spiritual awakening. There is a greater interest in it. And boy, it is happening in the nick of time. And I'm hoping that perhaps it will in some way be our salvation for all these ego-driven personalities.
I like to think that, to be honest. Yeah, I think I'm looking forward to seeing what the next decades have in store for us. And I understand why people may look at the current, situation in the world and may not see it that way. But I guess I like to think that, the phoenix always needs to, rise from the ashes, right? So it's a little inevitable that you need to shake a little bit humanity before they can, awaken again. So, yeah, I guess we'll see. But if you don't mind, let's go back briefly with communication with spirits. Obviously, you're an expert in the field, and what I really liked about I just started your book, and you're very good at explaining the fact that the lower vibrational frequency of the human soul needs to somehow align with the high vibration of the afterlife frequency in order, for communication to happen. Would you mind elaborating on that a little bit?
Certainly. We have 5 brainwave frequencies: gamma, beta, alpha, theta, delta. Gamma, that is when you're taking a calculus exam and your brain is cranking at full throttle, all right? Then beta, that's the activities of daily living, the state that you and I are in now, and all the listeners. That's the awake state. You're doing what you need to do. Alpha is the meditative state, relax. For all of our friends from Southern California, you understand this. That's a joke. But the thing is, alpha is when you begin to relax, and then theta is deep sleep and where you dream. Delta, there's very little brainwave activity occurring, but it's important because that's where you heal and there's cellular regeneration. That's where children grow the most during sleep. It is on the alpha theta border at 8 hertz. All of these brainwave frequencies can be quantified and measured through EEG, electroencephalogram, and QEEG, quantitative electroencephalogram, and we can find what the frequency is. So I've been studied a number of times as several of my colleagues, and at 8 hertz is when psychic and mediumistic activity occur. Spirits can spot this, and electromagnetic souls, and they adjust their frequency so you get a frequency match. This is one of the reasons, Dani, why so many people for thousands of years will report contact with spirits, particularly deceased loved ones, in the sleep state, because that's when it happens. And you look at throughout scripture, you have all types of dreams, Pharaoh having dreams that Joseph has to interpret, and the three magi, the wise men, they receive a message that Herod's going to try to kill the baby Jesus. And so you have all of that. But then you also have throughout recorded history, the Greeks, the Romans, the Indians, the Chinese, Native Americans, they all looked at that type of dream state as contact with the other side, with the other world. And now we're seeing that there's a scientific basis for this.
So I guess the obvious question would be, what can people do to try and learn how to communicate with spirits?
In my book, for people to learn how to communicate with spirits, my book, The Afterlife Frequency, I introduce my raft technique, and I teach people how to recognize, accept, feel, and trust messages from spirits. And I give you some exercises how to do that. All right, when you can recognize a sign, like you feel some a spirit around, you accept it for real. It's the third step, Dani. That's where people go wrong. The feel without overthinking. Okay. Oh, that's probably a figment of my imagination. I'm just, no, this can't be real. It's just a coincidence. When you do that, boom, you torpedo it. That's the end of it. And it does take work. And I'm an attorney. I know all about overthinking things. And you have to get that out of the way. And then you trust the message. And the important thing to understand when receiving spiritual messages are about love, healing, protection, and resolution. They're not about control. Spiritual messages are never about anger, bigotry, hatred, or violence. It always aggravates me in the news when I hear about a terrorist and their spiritual advisor. No, those people are not spiritual. They're religious fanatics, okay? And they're acting out of ego, not the spirit. When you act out of spirituality, you're acting out of love for another person, for the environment, for the world around you. Whenever you've done anything cruel or unkind to another person, was it because you were acting out of kindness and selflessness to them, for them? Or were you acting out of me as center of the universe? And when you start looking at that, you will be able to see the difference between the spirit and the ego. And when you're working with messages from spirits, that's when you'll be able to determine if the message is authentic.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Another question that I'd love to get your take on is, what do you think people can do that may not have had a near-death experience or some other type of direct experience to perhaps try and come to terms with the notion of an afterlife?
Religions have been telling people for thousands of years there's an afterlife. And for some people, religion will work for them. And I don't criticize religion as long as people follow the teachings of the religion, which they're all about peace and love and understanding. Yeah. Not about control, domination, starting war, and prejudice and violence. So you may want to embrace your faith community. Certainly, experience is a great teacher, but I think watching a program like this on near-death experiences, reading books like mine and those of my colleagues as well, educate yourself on this. The latest scientific discoveries, I'll be talking about them in my my keynote speech at the International Association for Near-Death Studies 50th Anniversary Conference. In the past couple years, there have been studies scientifically which have shown brainwave frequencies in people at the time of death spiking, and the scientists examining those indicate that this appears to be evidence of survival of consciousness. In other words, the sense of self and consciousness appears to survive physical death. And this is really fascinating stuff. Now, as a medium, I've been communicating with spirits since I've been a child. I've been part of paranormal investigations. I've worked alongside paranormal investigators that have the technology that scans the electromagnetic spectrum and picks up on voices of spirits. So, I mean, I know this is for real. I also work with Dr. Gary Schwartz, Professor Emeritus at the University of Arizona. He's developing the soul phone, and I've been in the laboratory. I can't talk about it because I'd love to, but I'm not allowed to. But we are on the verge, Dani, of scientifically proving that the soul, the spirit, the consciousness, the electromagnetic soul survives physical death. It is only a matter of time. And so for the people who are still questioning this, questioning is good. All knowledge begins with, I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. And wow, what a great world that would be if we all, reached this conclusion. And I do think, yeah, you find me, certainly optimistic on that. I do think that we're slowly heading there, and there's certainly some work to be done. We always have those, flat earthers. So, skepticism, I guess it's in our nature. I don't need to tell you, of course.
Oh, the flat earthers. I mean, seriously, really. So the people that are flat earthers, they're smarter than Copernicus, Einstein, Max Planck, Werner Heisenberg,
Right.
Galileo. I mean, Werner von Braun, Neil Armstrong, John Glenn, Michio Kaku. Yeah, Stephen Hawking. And the thing is, I live near Kennedy Space Center. My
Right.
father was an aerospace engineer. He worked on the Apollo program going to the moon. He's one of the guys who figured out how to get Apollo 13 back.
Nice.
Most of my friends are aerospace scientists. They're literally rocket scientists. I personally met Neil Armstrong, Buzz
Oh,
Aldrin. I had a lengthy discussion with John Glenn, the first American to orbit the Earth. I've also met Captain Mike Foreman, who piloted the space shuttle, and also Bill Nelson, who used to be the head of NASA, who was one of the first politicians that went on a space shuttle. I can tell you without a doubt, world is round.
I mean, there's so many easy ways to prove. I mean, all it takes is a high altitude flight just to see the roundness. My dad is a pilot himself, so I got to see it myself. And look, we can debunk this very easily in front of everyone. What time is it where you're currently at?
It is 11:55 a.m.
There you go, 11:55 a.m. in Florida. Here is, the sun is setting. It's the 6 o'clock in Venice, Italy. Explain that, to be honest.
Yeah. So if the world was flat, it would be like this, okay? And if the sun was up, it would be the same time everywhere. But it's not. Okay.
Exactly.
It's
So,
like this. Also, get a telescope.
yeah,
Not just look at the moon, look
so it
at
takes.
Saturn. Look at Jupiter. Look at Mars. Okay, look at the sun. I mean, it's laughable that in the 21st century we're still having this discussion. But there's an old expression: if a million people believe in a stupid idea, it's still a stupid idea.
I love that. Yeah, makes so much sense. That's great, Mark. All right, so on to the final questions. Why do you think we're here on Earth?
I think that we are here in limited finite form to experience things that we can't when we're pure energy. Think of the electromagnetic soul as a drop of water. And when we physically die, that drop of water plunges into the eternal sea of consciousness, which I refer to as the collective consciousness. And you're energetically linked to other spirits, other spirits, other spirits. And when you're free of a body, in some ways, you're in a sense of euphoria, but you're also connected to this incredible amount of information. And it appears that we come through various incarnations to experience things that we simply can't in an eternal form. Now, people say, to what end? And it's like, I don't know if anyone has that particular answer. I have insights. But like everyone else on the planet, I don't have all the answers. But it does appear that we're here for a reason. Everything that happens for a reason. And there's a day that we're coming into this world and a day that we're going out of it. What we have choice with, Dani, is the time in between. And that time in between, we're given free will. And free will is a gift from the divine. There may be events in our lives, like Dr. Mary Neal. She and I wrote an article about her, which is coming out in the August edition of Best Holistic Life magazine. It's called The Miraculous Mission of Dr. Mary Neal. And she said during her near-death experience, what she discovered is we have less control over our lives than we think we do, but we still are able to make decisions to determine what we do, what kind of person we're going to be. And what do all the religions teach us? They can all be boiled down to two words: be kind. Think about it. be nice to people, be kind to people, show compassion. And it appears to me that the afterlife frequency has different frequencies. And what we do here seems to have a correlation to the frequency that we're going into on the other side. Now, that all remains to be seen, but it comes down to this. We're here for a reason. We're here for a limited period of time. What we do affects the people and the environment and the world around us. And so the more positivity we generate, the more positivity in this world, and the more positive things will be when we leave this world.
Yeah, and obviously the better the life review that we're all going to have at the end of this life is going to be as well.
Oh, absolutely. I think about my life review because I work so much with NDEs, and it's funny because I'll think of things in my life that I'm not really proud of that I did when I was acting out of ego, and there's nothing I can do about those past things, but what I can do is learn from those and not repeat those behaviors.
Yeah.
And so for all of us, take a look at the things, because a lot of people live in the past. Oh, this happened to me and it was so terrible. Yes. And there's nothing you can do about yesterday, but there's a lot you can do about today. So just don't repeat those behaviors.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's the only way. That's great. What's your idea of God these days?
Well, God is not a neurotic white man sitting on a throne with a scepter, smiting people for not tithing 10%.
Clearly not.
I look at God in a way that Nikola Tesla did. What one person calls God, another calls the laws of physics. In other words, when we get back to the quantum and how everything is energetically linked, and how energy is neither created nor destroyed, only transferred from one form to another. Religions teach God always was and always will be. So we're seeing a parallel once again between faith and science. And I believe that God is the energy that flows through every living thing. And quantum entanglement teaches us that if there's two subatomic particles, even if separated by over 1 billion kilometers, if you do something to one, it immediately impacts and affects the other. And so God is the ultimate quantum entanglement, and there is an intelligence that flows through us, binding and connecting everyone and everything. And then people think, well, but I'm so insignificant, and if I pray, will God hear me? And I believe very much so the answer is yes. But we also have to keep in mind that God isn't Santa Claus, and we can't always go to God with our, I want these 10 things. Because sometimes when we pray and ask for something, the answer is no. And maybe it's no because that is what has to happen to us so that we are able to learn from, absorb, assimilate, process, and grow from the experience, whether negative or positive, that we carry on beyond this world. So that in a very condensed version is my view of the divine power that we call God.
Yeah, I love that answer. I don't know where I heard that, but I always really used to like when I heard people saying that God doesn't give us what we want, but He gives us what we need. This makes a huge difference. And sometimes we don't know ourselves what we need. It's probably only in hindsight that we realize, oh, I needed that little, hit to be able to learn certain lessons.
That's Dani, that is such a good point that you brought up, that God doesn't always give us what we want, but always gives us what we need. And it reminds me of one of my favorite quotes from Mother Teresa, who is now Saint Teresa of Calcutta. She said that God never gives me more than I can handle. I just wish God did not trust me so much.
Oh, that's brilliant. I wasn't aware of that. That's so nice. Very nice, Mark. So I have one last question for you. What's the meaning of life?
To be the best person that you can be. The meaning of life is to experience as much as you can and to bring as much love. Love is the meaning of life. And should you love yourself? Absolutely. But self-love isn't narcissism. Self-love is self-respect, confidence in that. Because George Harrison, the very mystical beetle. He was also converted to Hinduism, and he said something once which really resonated with me, is that when you look into the eyes of someone that you love, who loves you back, you're catching a glimpse of God.
Wow.
So God is love, and the purpose of life is love.
To experience that. Wow, well put. So what can people do if they want to know a little bit more about the work that you do?
I invite everyone to visit my website, which is afterlifefrequency.com, just like my latest book, The Afterlife Frequency. And you can find out about scheduling a reading with me if you go to my calendar of events and sign up for my newsletter. Then you'll be able to find out about all the upcoming spirit communication events, public speaking engagements. I'm constantly on tour, and I also write for Best Holistic Life magazines. You can find out about my books as well, all by visiting afterlifefrequency.com. And Dani, I want to thank you so very much for having me as your guest. It's such an honor.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, absolutely.
I look forward to when our paths cross in person.
Well, it looks like we're going to be seeing each other at the IANDS conference later this year.
Fantastic. I look forward to it.
Mark, thank you so much for all the work that you're doing. And yeah, wishing you all the best for now. Ta-ta.
Thank you.
Oh, hi there. Well, thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video and want to support the IANDS community, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe, and maybe share with the ones you love. If you're looking for another video to watch, I think this could be a very good one. New episodes out every Friday. And until then, enjoy the stream we all call live and live the love you wish to see in the world. Bye for now.